straight out the gate, spoiler warning for Keeper.
So the fairy tale goes. The lowly fisherman draws in his line and finds ensnared on its hook a fish. The creatures that live in this house in these woods, they're the fish on the hook. And when they get hungry, we feed them.
Osgood Perkins' Keeper is an extremely loose adaptation on an obscure Brothers Grimm fairy tale that, to tell you what it is up front, would pretty much spoil the reveal, so bear with me here. Keeper tells the story of a painter called Liz, whose boyfriend Malcolm takes her to his family's long-standing generational home to celebrate their first anniversary, where, as luck would have it, sinister happenings begin to arise that cause Liz to grow increasingly suspicious of Malcolm. It was Osgood Perkins' third horror film in the span of 16 months after Longlegs and The Monkey respectively, and given how I've covered his entire cinematic universe at this point, it feels like an obligation that I dive deep into the despair of perhaps his most divisive effort since 2016's I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. While he did not personally write Keeper in the same vein as his other director-only credit that also happened to be a feminist reinterpretation of another Brothers Grimm tale, Gretel and Hansel, the story of Keeper is still thematically molded around his DNA as it explores what Perkins simply described to comicbook.com as disgusting maleness. And if that sounds vague and unspecific, well, that's kind of because it is. The way I see it, Keeper is a film with absolutely evocative 10 out of 10 horror visuals in its last 10 minutes that are unfortunately buried behind a generously tedious 5 out of 10 story where, for both good and bad, very little truly happens until the final act. While I will be focusing on the many positives I have, what ultimately hurt the film for me going in was having the wrong expectations after Neon's notoriously brilliant marketing team produced a trailer that sold a far more compelling reverse Gone Girl-esque setup that is not at all present in the final film, but more on that later. Now, this is pure speculation on my part based on what I've read, but I think the film is mainly hindered due to its own premature stubbornness to exist, because Perkins was originally due to commence filming The Monkey when the 2023 Hollywood strikes occurred, leaving him and his crew to haphazardly put Keeper together in Canada to bypass union regulations and wait out the storm, so to speak, resulting in a film that, if you were to tell me was shot during COVID lockdown, I would believe you. Now, I don't want to give the wrong impression that I dislike the film. I think there's a fair bit of value within it, but the relative thematic vagueness feels like Perkins is sometimes desperately trying to get too much blood out of a stone out of boredom until he was able to shoot the monkey, resulting in a brooding mood piece with tremendous potential that would have gone further had it had the time to spend longer in development. But if you're willing to come on this weird little cabin fever journey with me, as always, brace yourself. Keeper uniquely opens with various impressionistic portrait shots of women throughout time that initially appear timidly romantic, only to very soon morph into uncomfortably voyeuristic before suddenly cutting to violent screams, suggesting an eternal threat is preying on women. This juxtaposition between calm and soft and brooding and violent is essential to the editing rhythm the film relies on. The heavy use of superimpose and cross dissolves alludes to a ghoulish generational cycle of predatory behavior as history repeats itself time and time again as every victim's tragic and forgotten tale fades into the same ceaseless, unchanging fable. While it narratively serves to foreshadow Liz's journey, if we account for Perkins' broad folkloric depiction of men preying on women, it establishes this tragic and haunting cycle that Liz is either inevitably doomed to become a part of, or hopefully be the one to finally break it. Now, you could say the film almost immediately drops the ball by doing an unconvincing job at persuading you that Malcolm is a good guy whose ambiguous behavior is a possible misunderstanding caused by Liz's increasing anxiety and cabin fever towards the big, empty, isolated, unfamiliar house they're staying in. If you've watched any genre film ever, you will be immediately suspicious of Malcolm. However, in playing devil's advocate, I will argue its minimal effort to hide the fact greatly suits the banal and insidious nature of predatory men who casually mask their dangerous ways through palpable innocence that leaves you thinking, surely this man is harmless. As such, it lingers on the notion that it's incredibly easy to fake sincerity, thus leaving you in doubt over whether it is truly as obvious as it's implied. What makes this work is that we see the world entirely through the potentially unreliable perspective of Liz, who in private confides in her friend Maggie that she doesn't really know this guy as well as she thinks she should, and questions if she's simply overthinking it and should just keep going with the flow because things seem to be going well. It's explained that her relationship with Malcolm is still fairly young, so there's an inherent uncertainty about the future, as she even laments about wanting to start a family and what it would be like to have kids, thinking she would be bad at it, tying into a point later in the film. It's practically embedded in the film's title of whether Malcolm is a keeper and vice versa. The tension hinges on the fact that Liz rightfully cannot surrender herself to a man she still feels is a bit of a stranger to her. In fact, the extent to which we learn anything about Liz comes purely through her brief interactions with Maggie, where I took Liz as suffering depression given how dazed, trepidatious, and seemingly unpresent she is throughout, thus leaving her vulnerable to potential deception. Actress Tatiana Maslany shared a very insightful reading of the film to Collider that I feel gives greater gravitas to the foreboding minimalism of what is essentially an hour of Liz trying to find peace of mind in a tranquil setting that's disturbed by remnants of a violent past. To paraphrase what she told Collider, Liz is sleepwalking through her life and is in denial of things we know to be true. It actually echoes a very similar setup to Zach Cregger's Barbarian, which in that film framed its entire first act around primal instincts, red flags, and survival signals outlined in Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear. It helps give meaning to why the film is so uncomfortably static and quiet. It's like Liz's senses are heightened out of a primordial fear that something isn't right, while also trying to suppress those feelings because, again, it seems like everything is going well between her and Malcolm, so why should she doubt it? There's a nuanced internal conflict constantly happening because when the well is so historically poisoned, it's rational for Liz to remain cautious, especially if she's previously had bad experiences. As a result, the intercutting between calm and unstable moods show Liz attempting to find solace while restlessly questioning her circumstances that soon manifest into spirits around the house that aid in confirming her suspicions. It cannot be understated how much heavy lifting comes from Tatiana Maslany's performance as she irradiates tremendously subtle emotions, especially after Malcolm's domineering and sleazy cousin Darren intrudes upon their weekend getaway with his Eastern European girlfriend Minka, who hints at her own personal discomfort towards the situation. After Minka is later killed by an unseen monstrous presence, Liz's visions of dead women only intensify, echoing a similar approach to Perkins' I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, which used a classical ghost story to existentially meditate on the presence we leave behind after we're gone and the tangible memories that bleed into the walls of the homes we go into. Quite literally, in fact. Call it me coping, but the house innkeeper becomes a major character in its own way, specifically reminding me of Frank Lloyd Wright's 1930s holiday home Falling Water that became a prominent icon of organic architecture. As explained by spatial design architects, organic architecture developed from Wright's philosophy that a building must be constructed in harmony with the natural environment, drawing from the sentiment that a home is the extension of one's identity and thus represents a state of being. In other words, like The Pretty Thing or David Lowry's A Ghost Story, just to give another artsy comparison, Keeper uses the house to reflect on the concept that regardless of your spiritual or superstitious standing, every home is indented with history, both the good and the bad, and every subsequent owner inherits that legacy and becomes a part of it. In the case of Liz, it's evident that a lot of women were clearly brutally fucking murdered here, as confirmed when a drunken Darren coerces his way into the house to kill Liz, while Malcolm is back in town dealing with a dying patient. However, before he can succeed, Liz intuitively locks herself in the bathroom, and Darren is quietly beheaded by another monstrous presence, with all traces of his death being covered up, soon culminating in Liz begging Malcolm to take her home, only for her to quickly soften her resolve when Malcolm attempts another timid and seemingly sincere romantic gesture. Now, it's at this point before we get into the climactic revelations that I want to address the trailer, because while I wouldn't say it's false advertising because technically it doesn't lie, it definitely conceptualizes the story in a very different manner than what the final film presents. In the trailer, we see both Malcolm and Liz introduced with individual title cards and narrations to imply both of them are keeping secrets, with Liz's name notably having quotation marks as if to insinuate that Liz is not who she says she is, and it's then reinforced by ending the trailer from Malcolm's perspective as if a dramatic twist. With that in mind, Perkins often presents his films from different perspectives that recontextualize your understanding of events when new information is revealed. Thus, I was left with the impression there was a blatant misdirect waiting to happen. The thing is, as I said earlier, we spend the entire film in Liz's shoes, yet we practically learn nothing about her. There's never even any mention or suggestion that she has a traumatic or troubled backstory. As such, I just could not shake the feeling that her perspective was unreliable, and eventually we would see events from Malcolm's point of view to make sense of it. In fact, just the way it constantly uses translucent imagery, tight framing, mirrors, and reflections, it's not only conveying an immense sense of perpetual voyeurism, but it gives the sense that something is psychologically off about this reality. In actuality, however, the movie is far more straightforward than that, and it does give a sneaky reason to the quotation marks when we discover several boxes containing memories of previous victims, including Liz, confirming the literal notion that the house is embedded with history. The twist is that there technically isn't one. Liz has every right to be concerned from the very start, but she is subdued by the fact that Malcolm is this charming guy who genuinely loves her, even though he is clearly planning something nefarious. From a storytelling perspective, it's not bad, I just wish there was more to it, but thematically speaking, I appreciate that it suits the reality of red flags and survival signals, and how Liz is too naturally passive and thus subconsciously submissive to someone who brings her a feeling of companionship that she is too scared to live without, as implied when Malcolm leaves her alone to go into town and she sheds a tear that speaks 1,000 words. The way I see it, Liz desires someone in her life to look after her because she's afraid she cannot look after herself, hence the doubts about being a mother, and then she cuts off her friend Maggie when she's outright accused of being Malcolm's mistress while Malcolm's real family is back in town, making Liz feel used and worthless. So with all that in mind, what the fuck is actually going on? Well, eventually, Liz finds a several-decade-old photo of Malcolm with a wife and kids, to which he casually reveals he and Darren are over 200 years old. It's explained that 2 centuries ago, as kids, both Malcolm and Darren shot and enslaved an impregnated woman trespassing on their property, who we can assume to be a witch, and she gave birth to creatures from a Junji Ito story? Now, the Brothers Grimm tale I mentioned in the opening is explained here by Malcolm, who tells Liz a folk tale about a fisherman who found a talking fish and was granted wishes in exchange for letting the fish go. Thus, after Malcolm and Darren killed the woman, they kept the children alive so that in exchange for feeding them other women, Darren and Malcolm could prolong their aging and live forever. It's basically a selfish, low-stakes version of the twist from Midnight Metrian, but poorly conceptualized. That said, there is something to how it plays into this theme of men's treatment towards women, by how they associate the woman they enslaved with inferior pig swine, with the creatures maybe representing the bastardization of innocence due to the wickedness of man. I mean, the deeper you theorize on this, the nastier it gets. In Malcolm's own words, Liz is literally giving him life, but is somehow different from all the others in that he truly loves her. This ends up being an ignorance that works against him when it's then revealed that Liz is seemingly destined to break the cycle because she's effectively a reincarnation of the woman they enslaved, thus the children begin to see Liz as their mother. In the original Brothers Grimm tale entitled The Fisherman and His Wife, the fisherman's wife is the one who demands the wishes be granted but refuses to be satisfied. She eventually wishes to basically become God, causing the fish genie, I guess we could call it, to take away the couple's wishes and everything they acquired, leaving them destitute for not being grateful for having enough. As the Wikipedia source even states, it's a 101 parable about greed and excess, which in Keeper is reframed to show Malcolm and Darren never being satisfied but too complacent to realise that one day their luck is destined to run out. In the end, Malcolm loses his power once Liz is forced to inherit her position as the creature's mother, soon stringing his rapidly aged ass up and preserving, or rather drowning his head in honey, which I take as being a sort of classic folkloric symbol for purity, innocence, and the prosperity of harvest, especially when overtly and ironically contrasted against the rotten, disgusting, drugged-up chocolate cake the cousins seduce every woman into eating to incapacitate them. Or at least, I'll admit, I'm saying that about the honey because the Nicolas Cage version of The Wicker Man got stuck in my head and then I just sort of checked out after that. As I said at the start, there's a lot of tremendous artistic value within it, but I think you could get away with shortening this down to a 30-45 minute film and lose none of the substance. I'm all for more experimental and surreal horror films, but I just feel like Keeper doesn't go hard enough with its weirdness or absurdity to capture the same charm as a Terrence Malick or David Lynch film. But until next time, stay safe, stay away from honey, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.